Yeah, I think it's.
Whenever you're ready to start, if not, you can leave it again, if you're ready to start.
Okay, no, I think we're ready. We got a forum, right?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order the May 13th meeting of the zoning board of appeals. I'd like to introduce the board. On the TV, we have Steve Bishkop, who's zooming, a regular member. We have John Zayer to my left, who's a regular member. My name is Richard Gilbert. I'm the chair. Dennis Crowe and I do. Dylan, who is also a regular member. Four votes are needed for an application to be approved. Simple majority is not sufficient. Our zoning officer will read the call. The meeting is advertised in the publication. After the application have been read, anyone who wishes to withdraw, postpone his or her application is free to do so. If no one does that, we'll go forward in the order in which they've been advertised. There's only one, so I guess we don't have to worry about that. The zoning officer will call the application, at which time the applicant and his or her representative will come forward and state his or her name for the address for the record, the nature and the reason for the appeal. The applicant representative should stand where he or she can be seen, and all displays can be seen by both the board and the audience. Any and all items, plans, or pictures shown to the board are considered exhibits, and all exhibits must be left with the file. After the presentation is made by the applicant, we will entertain questions from members of the board, then entertain questions from the audience. We will, after that has taken place, accept presentations or statements either in favor of or opposition to the application. Please be sure to state your name and address the first time you speak, and then your name any subsequent time you speak. When your application has been heard, we will close the public portion of the application, and the board will go into deliberations with the seated members. Let me see. Once we do start the deliberations, we cannot accept any more testimony, and in most instances, we'll make the decision immediately after the hearing. And Dylan tonight will be seated as a regular member. So I'll now ask our zoning officer to read the appeals to be presented tonight.
Legal notice, Madison Zoning Board of Appeals, Madison, Connecticut. Notice is hereby given that the board will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, May 13th, 2025, beginning at 7 p.m. in Meeting Room A, Town Campus, 8 Campus Drive, Madison, Connecticut, 06443. This is a hybrid meeting, and attendees may also join by Zoom webinar through either the webinar link or call-in information below, www.zoom.us, webinar ID 920-02702-103, password 388818, or call in at 1-646-558-8656. The following applications will be heard. 25-03, 27 Green Hill Place, map 44, lot 4, zone C, owner applicant 27 BB LLC, Bruce Beebe. Variance request to section 6.1.3C, 6.5 feet variance request for 13.5 feet to the southerly property line where 20 feet is required. 6.1.3C, 7.5 feet variance request, 12.5 feet to the north property line where 20 is required. In section 21.17, 48-foot variance request for 2 feet to the critical coastal resource where 50 is required. Application includes a coastal site plan. Copies of these applications are available for inspection at the Land Use Office. Further details on how to participate in the webinar are posted on the Town of Madison website, www.madisonct.org. All written correspondence can be submitted to the Land Use Department via email, landuse@madisonct.org, or dial 203-245-5631 for assistance. Dated this 22nd day of April, 2025, Richard Gilbert, Chair. This was published twice in The Source, once on May 1st and once on May 8th.
Thank you, Maria. So I'd like to call the applicant for application 25-03, 27 Green Hill Place.
Do I need to use the microphone?
It's only if you're a soft talker.
Great. Good evening. My name is Chris McKeon. I'm an attorney. I represent the applicant, 27 BB LLC. My office address is 900 Chapel Street in New Haven. I also live here in Madison at 31 Hotchkiss Lane. With me tonight is Mr. Bruce Beebe, who is the principal and owner of the site. The project architect, Duo Dickinson, and the project engineer, Stevens and Associates, Tony Bolduc from their office. This project is a long time in coming. I think it might be the first project I've come before your board where we actually have a fully approved septic system. B100A and site plan are all approved, and that is in large part one of the bases for hardship here. The site is, the soil conditions on the site are somewhat challenging in the sense that there's one location for a new state-of-the-art septic system. And that location that was arrived at through a lot of the hard work from Tony Bolduc and Duo's office to relocate the existing structure, which is a single-family home and a shed in the rear. I don't know if you've been by the site, but the condition of them are, they need to be taken down. They're open to the elements. The site itself is in the commercial district, and it has a lot area of 6,528 square feet, where 20,000 feet is required in the commercial district. So it's a substantially undersized lot. It also has a minimum lot width of 68 feet, where a typical lot in the commercial zone is required to have 100 feet. Those factors, the soil conditions, as well as the critical coastal resource line, basically renders the building envelope unbuildable. So we have an existing home and shed, which as of right could be rebuilt in place and raised to FEMA level. But what we're proposing and the reason we're seeking the variances is that there's a better alternative to reconstruction in place here to get the new structure to the FEMA level and to have a complying and approved state-of-the-art septic system. The buildings, the current buildings are non-conforming in a number of respects. The most notable, and again, if you've been by the site, is the front yard setback. The house is very close to the street, and that front yard setback is 20 feet. It's actually located 12 feet from the property boundary. Both of the side yards are non-conforming, which is understandable for a lot that's only 68 feet wide when it's required to be 100. The south side yard is located 9 feet from the property boundary, and the north is 15.9. And then there is also a nonconformity with respect to the shed as to the rear yard, although we weren't able to verify the actual height of the shed. So I didn't list it as a nonconformity that's going to be eliminated, although I think it probably is. As you know, the rear yard for an accessory building, it can be located as close to 6 feet from a side yard or rear yard. And if you take a 45-degree angle from the line, as long as your accessory building is under that, you can move closer. But since we didn't know the exact height, although both Tony and I and Duo think it probably was non-conforming at 8.9 feet from the rear property line, it probably is a non-conformity that's going away because the shed is going to be demolished. So the The front setback, again, which I think is the most egregious and most notable when you look at the site, that will be completely eliminated. The new structure will adhere to and comply with the front yard setback. The side yards, one will be improving significantly. We're moving the house to the right and back. So there is an existing nonconformity on both sides. When we shift the location of the house, there is a net gain, if you will, in terms of side yard setback violations. So they'll be less than they were existing with the existing house. Although it's not a technical violation, the removal of the shed from the critical coastal resource area is something that I think we would all want to encourage. And the demolition and rebuilding of this home with a state-of-the-art septic and it being FEMA compliant, and all of the factors that I just covered require us to get 3 variances that we're here for. We're looking for 2 side yard variances. On the south, we're looking for a variance to permit 13.5 feet where 20 is required. On the north, we're looking to have a 12.5 foot side yard variance where 20 feet is required. So those 2 distances kind of put the house in the center and further back, a much more logical location for the house on this particular site. And then the third is the critical coastal resources. Virtually the whole site is a critical coastal resource. So it seems like a significant request, but we're asking to permit a 2.0 foot setback where 50 feet are required. So I'm happy to answer and address questions about hardship or reduction of nonconformities. I know you all have heard my arguments in those regards before, but I want to let Tony and Duo introduce the project in more specific terms.
As Chris stated, Tony Baldwin with Tom Steven and Associates. So I just wanted to address the coastal resources for the site. So if you look pretty close. Look at you going ahead.
Get it shared for the guy online.
Okay, so we'll be able to point there. So the coastal jurisdiction line is the critical coastal resource that we're staying on. The CJL is also the tidal wetlands. We'll call that south of that is still a critical coastal resource because it's a flood hazard area. So the site is entirely flood zone elevation 11, which is why you see that the structure is being raised to elevation 12 to make that FEMA compliant. And actually there's a foot of freeboard now required with the building code. So that's been raised an actual extra foot. So in removal of the shed, as Chris stated, taking that entirely out of the tidal wetlands. And protection will be offered up by silt fence, which is along both property lines and along the back, just touching the critical coastal resource at the moment. That's pretty much it for that stuff. If you guys have any questions?
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure. You said the house is going to be 12 feet,
Yeah, elevation 12, yes.
elevation 12.
Yep.
Yeah. What's going to be the
Underneath?
underneath? I can answer that.
Sounds like you're up.
That's my cue. So if we,
Would you like the architectural?
why not? So essentially, this is the classic FEMA site. And what that means is that we have to reach down with the steps as the entry. And that's got to be flow through, which is the entry is here. And it's actually everything but the entry itself is actually open completely. And that open underside and with the code compliant compressors set up on the building, this basically represents almost a diagram of what a FEMA compliant building is. And because of the tightness of everything, it gets proportionately tall, but it's also because it's only a 2-story building and we try to keep it as simple as possible. Maybe go to the next slide. We wanted to make sure that when we made this, it was quite beautiful from the salt marsh and from Route 1 and from the highway. So that it was actually kind of almost like a a pretty thing to see. And that's why we have a cupola. We meet all the height limitations with the variance we do. But there's the entry steps that come down. Everything else is open. Everything else is open. And we cantilever out some decks because it's a steel structure. It has to be because of the wind loading. We can have a little bit of extra deck space, and in a building that's floating in space, it's nice to be able to walk outside. And that's pretty much it. It's very, very simple, everything. The materials are all going to be what's around the building now. There'll be some nice eave projections, so it won't look like a box. It'll look like a nice thing. So
Okay, so you say it's open, I see grayed out areas, what are those?
that's just 3D fencing because we might want to store some stuff underneath it. If you have the pictures of the model, we could go to those too, actually.
So it's open structurally. but
Yes.
fencing.
Except for the stair, which has to be closed but can't be heated and it has to have flood vents in it. So if you take a look at the model, basically you can see it's all open underneath, and they're the decks.
Is that your model right there?
Yeah, it's the model right there. I'm not allowed to give it to you because it's evil.
you are.
Somebody got their wrist slapped this afternoon.
I did. I was told I could wear it as a
You can bring it, but you needed to submit it, so
So look,
for
if
the
I-
people online.
Well, you have to leave it, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm keeping that on my desk, yeah.
So it's extremely simple, but I think it's also quite a wonderful thing in the context of this very open marsh site.
The house was built, I guess, obviously before the coastal resource line was drawn.
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, it's just a one-story, not great building was added onto a bunch of times, and who knows when the core building was done.
Would one of you mind reviewing the coastal site plan since we're talking about
That's his cue.
Tony's back.
the application?
The vision appraisal says it was built in 1945.
There you go.
Okay.
So,
Okay, you had questions about the coastal site plan part of
If
it?
you could briefly review it for us.
Yeah.
Highlights.
Yeah,
anything you
so-
wanna tell us.
Out of the application itself or just out of the site plan?
you want to zoom in on that?
Sure. They like reading from the application.
Ah, gotcha. Okay.
You have to go into detail, just kind of summarize.
There we go.
There you go.
Here's the good stuff. We're good.
So we were on 4. You were moving too quickly. I was looking on my paper copy. Section 3. Am I not finding this? There we go. So the land trust owns the property to the north, which is zoned R2. The East River is to the west, and a boat storage / boat launch and dock occupy the property to the south, which is also zone C. The property to the east across Green Hill Place is also zone C. It contains a 4-bedroom residential home and detached commercial building. The subject and surrounding properties are all within flood zone 811. As indicated earlier, that the site is only 6,528 square feet. So the existing house, outbuildings and septic are all going to be demolished, while a new code compliant septic system will be installed as indicated towards the front of the property. And a new FEMA compliant house will be constructed. The new house will be more centered on the property and will reduce the encroachment to the south building setback and the coastal setback. The encroachment into the east setback will be eliminated, which is the front, and the lot coverage will be decreased from 16.93% to 16.05%. Additionally, 120 cubic yards of filler will be required to install the new septic system. And because impervious coverage is being reduced by 9%, no provision is being made to mitigate stormwater runoff.
Sorry. Say that last one again.
Oh, so
Last
because,
sentence.
yeah, because we're reducing our impervious coverage by 9%.
Okay.
And then the same thing, there's currently no stormwater retention on site. And we're not proposing any because we're reducing. think that's right, that's it. Yep, the existing encroachment will be removed from the coastal jurisdiction line / tidal wetlands. All new construction will be land border, the coastal jurisdiction line / tidal wetlands. On-site and adjacent resources will be protected by the installation of filter fabric fencing and a construction entrance. And the town agents will inspect the installation and authorize the removal upon completion of the project. Coastal resources are currently in good condition and will not be adversely impacted by the improvements. Public, and again, this is public access because the parcel adjacent to us is the land trust.
Maybe show them the aerial.
Yeah. Okay. The. Please hold.
This is the aerial pretty much just shows greenery at the moment. There's lawn area in the back and the trees.
Your
kind of-
aerial, but yes,
It's actually a red dot.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's funny, I think if you're on the GIS.
No, it's just, we actually, there we are.
Oh, this one?
Yes,
Okay.
Ah,
Oh, that's the one you meant, no?
yes.
Okay.
See how it's nestled in and recessed?
yeah, and then this parcel here is the one that's owned by the land trust, so there's public access there. Questions?
Okay. So, is that Boston Post Road?
Yep,
Yes, right here is Boston Post Road.
and that's I-95 on top.
Okay, got it. Yep, yep. Makes sense.
Two points I wanted to make on the coastal site plan, and I'm not sure whether you've seen it, but it came in late today, a response from Deep that they had no issues with the plan. They recalled the prior zone change to the property. And they literally had no comments on this, which is pretty amazing given the nature of this site. And I had forgotten to mention, although Tony did cover it, the reduction in building coverage in this area. Although it's not a reduction in nonconformity that would serve to justify a variance, it is significant in the coastal site plan realm that you're covering less of the property, certainly. I know they look for that frequently. So I wanted to point those two things out while we're talking about the site, coastal site plan. Okay.
You might have, I'll remember this, but, how many feet is the existing structure from currently from the critical coastal resource?
So if you count the bed, it is in the coastal resource. And then, so the structure itself. Let's see here. So you're looking for the main building?
Yeah.
Of course, that's the one dimension that's not on there, but I did bring a scale.
You could actually see it as the dashed line there, as the existing building,
This is the shed.
and that's all in the coastal resource.
That's the shed.
This is, I did want to point this out too. You can see that the red outline is existing. And what we have is we have a sort of shift back and slight shift this way to accommodate the septic. So I think from a coastal standpoint, whether we're talking about coastal site plan review or critical coastal resources, the fact that the building is a bit closer to the coastal resources has so less impact than a non-compliant septic system
Right.
that would have where it's currently located. So from a coastal standpoint, what we're proposing is far better environmentally.
Where was the
Yeah.
existing septic?
So the existing, it's a piecemeal. So we dug
Yeah.
up, there's a dry well here, and I think we had a tank over here.
Okay.
And there was clearly bleed out,
Okay.
which is why we tried to do other test pits, but it was failing in this area. So,
And to be honest, we had actually done a design based on the existing footprint. And it was going to be quite brutal to try to weasel in some sort of snaky system around the whole thing. And we got the call from you, I think, that basically said, well, if we can have a great septic system, because like everywhere in Connecticut, like a 5-foot difference makes the soils completely different.
Right.
If we shove it down a little bit. So in a sense, this is, given the fact that it's flow through, is just about benign.
So the soil difference in that short distances.
It's a huge difference.
It's bizarre. And
Yeah.
this is not the only job this has happened, where you go 15 feet and it's a completely different soil type.
And we also did two rounds of soil testing there just to go back and verify a second
Yeah.
time. We brought a soil scientist both times.
So how far is it? What was, to Dennis's question, how
Yeah.
far was
So the closest point would be 14 feet,
it?
if you exclude the actual encroachment.
Any other questions?
But,
I have a question about the height of the building. What is your interpretation of the maximum height?
Well, we have a cupola height, which I think is 50 feet to the top of a cupola. We're under that. We have the mean of the mean of the main roof form, which is also the highest roof form, of 35, and we're under that. So we're under those two in this district.
I would note in the C district, unlike most of the variances you see, which are in the residential district, that the heights are different.
Very
In the C district, you can by special exception go to 45 feet. You have to go to the planning and zoning commission to get it, but we're meeting the current.
Yeah.
Without that.
I mean, a good example of that is we did Clarity Commons, and Clarity Commons is in a similar district where a 4-story building is actually in the zoning code. And so here, because everything's raised up, we took advantage of that to get a little more 3-dimensional presence.
So the lower level does not include in the height.
Oh, it is.
No, it
Those
is.
included, yes.
So the top of the building is 48 feet high, right?
Well, just the cupola.
Just the cupola, he's 33.8 or
Yeah,
33
For
feet
the
10
main
inches.
body of the building, the high definition says 30 feet. 33 to 10.
Do you have anything else? Steve, do you have anything? We can't see you.
I have all the things on my screens, but yeah, I have no questions.
Oh, actually, I have one more question. So, and I can understand if you can't answer this, but, does whether or not we, grant a variance tonight have any bearing on whether or not the, shed is going to be demolished? Or is it, probably going to be demolished anyway?
I don't know that that I can't answer it. I think that the point is that the shed can be rebuilt in place. So it doesn't, you could demolish it, but if you have an intent to put it back, you have the legal right to put it back where it is because it's a non-conforming structure. So I'm not sure what the owner's intentions are. It may be needing to be taken down because of it must be a dangerous structure at some point. But I think the point for, as I understand it, for the variance analysis is that shed has the owner of the property has the right to rebuild it and the home that's there. Now, in the location where it is, which would, I think, turn the septic application into a whole different, not a new septic, it would be a remodel or a renovation.
Repair.
And so what you have is you have a failing septic system that would be tweaked with, rather than moving the structure in order to put the septic that is new and state of the art. So I mean, I think the overall effect environmentally, I said it earlier, the overall effect environmentally here with the proposed project, rather than a rebuild in place, is significantly better.
Okay.
Any questions? Is anyone online for you? Have their hands up?
no attendees.
Okay, so I'm not gonna ask if anyone wants to speak in favor or against.
I just have one general question, and it pertains to narrow lot definition in the zoning rules. Does that also pertain to commercial lots?
I believe that's residential, right?
I believe it's just residential. I can double check that. And I want to correct something that I just said about the average building height too, because the average building height we're showing as 33.8, which is 30. So we do have to get a special exception for the extra 3.8 feet. But that's from planning and zoning, because you can go to 45 feet. So I stand corrected on what I said earlier in response to your question. But I do believe the narrow lot is only for residential lots too. But I can check that for you.
This is not specific in the,
No, it's not. It's just in the general section of 2.
Right.
this would be considered a narrow lot.
It only calculates it for heights in residential, so.
Two 7.1.
It's still 30 feet though, I guess is my point, because we're meeting 60% or more of the minimum lot width. I think we're 68, where 100's required, right?
Mhm.
And the commercial zone average building height is 30 feet, and that's what it says on that table as well, 2.7.1. And as I just indicated, because the average building height is 33.8,
Yeah,
we're going to planning and zoning for the special exception to get to that height in the commercial district. So it's a good point, the narrow lot, and it does, I don't think it helps or hurts the analysis, because all that does is change what the required average height is in the zone, and it's the same number in the commercial.
So just explain to me again, where do you see the 30 feet on the drawings?
3310 at the midpoint of the main roof.
Oh, I see over here.
Yeah. And the one thing I can tell you based on other towns is there are towns that take into consideration the mandatory elevation of changing the base of what the building is, so that since we have to go up a floor and that's not occupiable, some towns say that mitigates the net height encumbrance, because you're forced to go higher and therefore they give credibility to you.
raising existing structure.
Right, you're raising existing structure, right? They sometimes even do with new ones. So it's because there are federal laws that basically protect owners' rights. Some of them interpret it to be for anything that's raised.
That is an interesting point.
It is.
We do have the right, when you're raising for FEMA an existing home, to go higher. And when you're factoring in, like Mr. Stella just asked about, when you're asking about what is something going to be demolished or the before and after, I think it has to be weighed against what the owner of the property has the right to do with no variances, and that is the existing structure could be raised to an even higher height than what we're seeking to go to here if we took it, because it's an existing building, but because we're building a new building, we have to maintain a lower height. So the FEMA raise doesn't help us in the height limitation. That I think that regulation was designed to help people
It was.
raising their existing house and give them some relief on the height. But when you're doing a demo and rebuild in a better location, the regs don't help you in that regard.
Although the boards do. The boards actually take it into consideration.
The narrow lot is only mentioned under the bulk standards in the residential. It's not mentioned asterisk under any of the bulk standards for the commercial zone. So, but under the residential zone where it says the height and width and, the house, that's where it's mentioned C 2.71 for narrow lots. But so I don't believe it applies to the commercial.
Yeah, as I said, I don't, even if it did, I
Did,
don't think it.
you're covered
it helps
because it's
or
30
hurts the
feet, yeah.
Analysis, yeah.
Any other questions? Do you have any questions? Any final comments anybody would like to make?
Like Chris said, we normally don't come here with a finished septic product, but this was such a tricky site that we figured that was the best approach.
So,
I move we close the open portion and move into deliberations.
I'll second that. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Steve, do you want to start? Put you on the spot since you're on the TV.
I can handle that. I think this is pretty much, we've seen a number of these come across our desk here. I think they're not expanding the existing structure. They're raising it to be compliant with a FEMA requirements. I believe that putting the compliant septics and then having the hardship to move the house forward, I think justifies the movement of the house to form. And I didn't count the number of reductions in non-conforming. I'm sure the legal counsel can set that, but I see at least there's no change. I think there's a reduction in the non-conformity, so I would be in favor of approving this.
Okay. John, do you want to?
I agree with Steve. I took a look at the site and, the setbacks and the house pretty much is on its own, so it's really not affecting neighbors in any sense.
Right, that's a good point.
So, based on the fact that it's been approved, the coastal plan and FEMA, then go ahead and approve this application.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that because I agree with those, the lot size limits, and the offsets, the existing offsets, reduced by virtue of removing the shed. And I think the fact that we gain a state-of-the-art septic, it comes to the cost of moving the house a little closer to the river, but that doesn't seem to be as much of a negative as the positive of getting the state-of-the-art septic. So for those reasons, I agree.
John?
I'll be honest, I do kind of struggle with, I guess, the legal justification, because I don't entirely agree with the inclusion of demolishing the shed in terms of I guess the calculation and reduction in nonconformities. I kind of just feel like that's its own thing, and it's kind of separate from where the house is being moved to. However, I guess for the reasons that the other board member mentioned, making the house more compliant, and I guess the fact that you have a finished septic system, it's definitely a very difficult property, right? It's difficult to work with, and it seems that the construction was done in good faith to given the dynamics of the, you know, of the property and of the flood zone. So I'm just going to say that I think there is a hardship. I don't know if you're necessarily like technically reducing nonconformities, but if you want to just, I guess, argue that, that the way the, I mean, I guess the size of the property and also, the soil and making it FEMA compliant, I think it does constitute a hardship in this case. So I will vote to approve it, I guess, as with some hesitation.
Okay. I think there's nothing more I can add. I agree with, what was said. There are several reductions. The front's eliminated. I think mitigating factors that the environmental effects of the septic and, sorry, you mentioned them too.
State-of-the-art septic and the problems were cited by deep. Removing the shed reduces.
Well, that may or may not be repurposed,
Unless we say, if the design includes it being removed, it depends on whether or not we put that in. The
it's gonna
variance.
be, well, it's gonna be demolished, but
Yeah,
because they said it's an existing non-conformity, so they can rebuild on the spot if they want, if they choose.
yes, unless the variance is approved contingent on that not happening. And that's up to whether or not we think that's a proper trade-off.
Okay, well,
The house is closer, but the shed's gone, so it's kind of a trade-off. It's up, it's up to us
yeah,
to decide that.
I think, I think given the shift in the lot, the improvements, that, to me, that's enough. I would, in my opinion, I don't think we don't need about a shed in there,
Yeah, I mean,
but it's certainly whatever you guys think.
yeah. I mean, I guess you could view the shed as like a gesture of goodwill and the fact that they're not reconstructing it. I mean, I just kind of just have a feeling that it's its own thing. That's my interpretation. But if the board wants to consider it, I mean, I think that's a reasonable point.
I think though, they have a legal right though, that's the thing. If it's built in the same spot and size and everything, I don't think we can.
Well, they have, well, yeah, they have the legal right to.
You can make that one of the provisions under which the variance is granted. I mean, they have a right to keep the house exactly where it is. They choose not to do that. And because they're putting the septic in, we say, that makes sense. Okay, so, but there's a trade-off there. And you can have all kinds of trade-offs. I'm just saying, when you make these trade-offs, you can make your variance state which trade-offs are fair in this. And you can convince me that that's not necessary, but as far as whether or not they have an absolute right, we can't touch that. I don't.
To say if it was conditioned in that way, I'd be more comfortable labeling it a full reduction in nonconformities, right? Because like you're actually like making sure that the nonconforming shed isn't going to be reconstructed. So I think that does make sense. I mean, whether or not that's something we could do, I mean, I think we probably have.
John and Steve, you want to weigh in on that?
I'm my mute button. I still go back. I think they're keeping you got to look at the hardship, and the hardship is result of doing something that's right, then that which is this putting in the proper septic system. They're not expanding the house at all. They're keeping the same footprint, and they're raising it to be FEMA compliant. And I think, based upon the location of the house and what they're doing, I don't see there needs to be a trade-off. I think I think the project itself justifies the, justifies, they're not expanding their square footage, they're raising it. They're putting in a compliant septic system. The coastal resource plan works. You know, I don't think we have to do a trade-off. I think the merits of the project stand by themselves.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point.
So the site plan says it's going to be demolished. Are you struggling because you're trying to find a reduction in order to make the variance work? Is that what your question?
Well,
Not Dylan, Dennis.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm simply saying that, the fact that there's a shed that's right up against the river, and you say you want to, remove that, that actually is a benefit. We do have the authority to make that, the fact of not putting that there as one of the criteria, for which we say, yes, we'll approve this under these conditions. I'm not saying that I'm convinced that we need to do that. I'm just saying it's something, I don't know. I mean, that's pretty close to me, right? But that's,
well, let me just add
the
that
sheet, you've got the big version. I'm looking at this thing where, there's 17 lines per inch.
Yeah, I think, I see your point, and all. I kind of think I agree with Steve that I think the project has enough merits on its own to not include the shed in our.
Okay. John, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so too. I think the shed is another box.
Okay. All right. So we'll drop that. So you want me to make a motion?
Would you like to?
Sure. Right. I'd like to move approval of application 2503 for 27 Green Hill Place. Granting a variance of 6.13C for 13.5 feet to the south. Property line is 6.13C, 12.5 feet to the north. Property line is section 217, 48-foot variance for 2 foot critical resource. Critical coastal resource. Given that justification being that the lot size limits what they can do, the existing there are existing offsets to the critical resource lot boundary. There's some reduction there, basically removing the front offset, reduces non-conformity. We do drop the shed. Okay. And state-of-the-art septic is a significant improvement on the risk. However, that the provision of such a septic is contingent on moving the house so that they can access the soil. And there have been no problems cited by DEEP. Construction must be completed per the application and the submitted design.
Move on coastal septic system. Have that as well.
Put it all in the same,
Yeah.
okay?
Typically do.
And that we approve the coastal site plan, it's consistent with the requirements thereof.
I will second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? This is unanimously. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And especially thank you for volunteering your time.
Yeah, actually, that's the biggest. Maybe a double our pages.
Make sure. Have a good night.
So minutes.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm gonna motion. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
House. Little house. Okay.
Somebody else?
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm gonna put a motion to leave the April 8th, 2025.
Second?
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Because I'm.
Passes unanimously, motion to adjourn.
be on my
Second?
Or do we have any other business? Anybody got anything?
Nothing already did there.
All right, motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.